Welcome to Moonlit Inc. BL. A BL story written under moonlight. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Fading Pulse. The summer air in the outskirts of the city didn't just shimmer, it felt heavy, like a wet wool blanket draped over the mountains. For Elis, this was the perfect weather for a disappearance. With a battered map tucked into his back pocket and a half-empty water bottle swinging from his pack, he pushed through the dense undergrowth. Most people his age were at the beach or huddled in air-conditioned internet cafes, but Elis had always been plagued by a restless itch in his soul. He didn't want to see the world through a screen, he wanted to feel the grit of it under his fingernails. Just one more ridge, he muttered, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. He broke through a cluster of overgrown cedars and stopped dead. Before him sat a shrine that time had clearly surrendered to the forest. The Torii Gate, once a vibrant vermilion, was now a peeling, sun-bleached orange, leaning precariously to the left. Vines thicker than Elis's wrist snaked around the stone lanterns, choking the light out of them. It's quiet, Elis thought, a chill running down his spine despite the heat. Too quiet. Usually, these old places hummed with a certain energy, a vibration of centuries of prayers and incense. But this place felt hollow. It felt like a house where the power had been cut and the inhabitants had long since fled. There was a pulse, though. A faint, thrumming vibration beneath his boots, like a heartbeat struggling to find its rhythm. "Hello," he called out. His voice was swallowed by the moss. Driven by a curiosity that felt less like an interest and more like a tether pulling at his gut, he followed the pulse. He bypassed the main hall, heading east toward the sound of trickling water. He found the spring tucked behind a jagged rock formation. The water was crystal clear but shallow, barely bubbling over the stones. And there, slumped against a moss-covered boulder, was the source of the heartbeat. Elis gasped, his hand flying to his mouth. It was a man, or the shape of one. He wore a kimono so intricate it looked woven from midnight and starlight, the heavy silk pooling in the water. His hair was a startling, impossible shade of deep cerulean, spilling over his shoulders like a frozen waterfall. "Hey! Are you okay?" Elis scrambled over the rocks, his hiking boots splashing into the cold spring. As he got closer, the air began to vibrate. That man lifted his head. Elis froze. The eyes that met his weren't human. They were a piercing, molten gold, sharp enough to cut, yet behind the sharpness sat a terrifying emptiness. It was the look of a predator who had forgotten how to hunt, or a king who had lost his kingdom. The man tried to push himself up, his knuckles turning white against the stone, but his arms buckled. He let out a low, ragged sound, a sound of pure, unadulterated pain, and slumped back down, his chest heaving with shallow, rattling breaths. "Don't move, you're hurt," Elis said, his voice trembling. He reached out, his fingers hovering just inches from the man's shoulder. The energy coming off him was dizzying. It felt like static electricity and the smell of ozone before a storm, but it was thinning, drifting away like smoke in a breeze. He's not just sick, Elis realized, his heart hammering against his ribs. He's fading. Elis remembered his grandmother's stories, tales of the kami who lived in the wind and the water. She had warned him that a god is only as strong as the heart that remembers them. Looking at the dilapidated shrine and the dying spring, the truth hit him with the force of a physical blow. This man was the god of this place, and he was dying because the world had moved on without him. "I'm going to help you," Elis whispered, more to himself than the deity. The gold eyes flickered, narrowed in confusion. "Mortal," the man breathed, the words sounding like the rustle of dry leaves. "Why, stay. There is nothing left here." "I'm here," Elis said firmly. He reached out and finally made contact, grabbing the man's arm to steady him. Elis flinched. The skin wasn't warm, it was unnaturally cold and smoother than polished marble, yet it felt fragile, as if he might accidentally crush it. With a grunt of effort, Elis hauled the god's arm over his shoulder. The weight was strange, at once heavy like stone and light like a shadow. "My name is Elis," he panted, beginning the slow, grueling trek back toward the shrine's main porch. And I'm not really good at leaving things half-finished. So, you're just going to have to bear with me. The god didn't respond, his head falling against Elis's neck. As they moved, Elis felt that faint, dying pulse throb against his own skin, a desperate plea for life that he wasn't ready to let go of. Chapter 2, Dust and Devotion. The transition from the spring to the shrine's main porch felt like dragging a piece of the sky across the earth. By the time Elis lowered the deity onto the weathered wood of the Engoa, his own shirt was soaked with sweat, contrasting sharply with the unnatural, glacial chill radiating from the man in the silk kimono. Elis stood back, hands on his knees, gasping for air. The god, this Chisei, lay still. His long blue hair was a tangled mess of silk against the gray, sun-bleached wood. What am I doing? Elis thought, his mind racing. I'm a 19-year-old with a backpack and a half-grade knowledge of Shinto rites. I can't fix a god. But then he looked at the shrine. The floorboards were thick with dust and bird droppings. The heavy braided rope, the shimenawa, was frayed and rotting, its paper streamers yellowed and torn. It wasn't just dirty, it felt neglected, like a grandparent left in an empty house. A surge of protective anger flared in Elis's chest. Right, Elis said, his voice cracking in the silence. Step 1, hygiene. For you and the house. He found an old wooden bucket near the well. The rope was stiff, but the water that came up was cold and sweet. He found a rag in his pack, a spare t-shirt he'd intended to use for a change of clothes, and dipped it into the water. He approached the god cautiously. Chisei's eyes were closed now, his long lashes casting shadows against his porcelain skin. I'm going to clean your face, Elis whispered. Please don't smite me. The moment the damp cloth touched Chisei's forehead, the god's eyes snapped open. The gold was dim, like dying embers, but the intensity made Elis jump. You, linger, Chisei rasped. His voice was a beautiful, haunting baritone, though it lacked the strength to carry. The others, they came, they asked, and when I could not give, they left. Why are you washing the porch of a ghost? Because it's a mess, Elis countered, trying to sound braver than he felt. He wiped a streak of grime from Chisei's cheek. And because I'm adventurous, remember? This is an adventure. Helping a grumpy god is definitely doing something different. Chisei let out a sound that might have been a scoff if he had the energy. I am not grumpy. I am finishing. Well, unfinish for a second, Elis muttered. For the next 3 hours, Elis worked with a frantic, rhythmic energy. He wasn't sure of the exact protocols. His father was Western and his mother was Japanese, so his upbringing was a patchwork of traditions, but he remembered the basics. He swept the dust until his arms ached. He used a branch to clear the heavy cobwebs from the eaves. He even attempted to fix the bell. The thick cord was tangled and stuck. Elis climbed onto a stone pedestal, reaching up until his fingers strained. With a sharp tug, the bell gave a sudden, resonant clack-bang. The sound rippled through the clearing, shaking the silence. Chisei flinched, his hand flying to his chest as if the sound had struck his very heart. He looked up at the bell, then at Elis, who was wobbling on the pedestal. The sound, Chisei whispered. I haven't heard the bell in 50 years. Elis hopped down, grinning despite the dust on his nose. Not a bad sound, right? It lets the world know you're still home. He approached Chisei again, this time bringing a small plastic container from his bag. It held some dried fruit and a bit of rice he'd packed for lunch. He placed it on a clean patch of wood near the god. I don't know if you eat, Elis said, rubbing the back of his neck. But my grandma always said hospitality is the first rule of everything. Chisei looked at the humble plastic container, then back at the boy with the messy brown hair and the earnest smile. The god's expression shifted, just a fraction, from cold indifference to a flickering, confused curiosity. You are a strange creature, Chisei said softly. He managed to sit up, his movements fluid but brittle. To give to a god who has nothing to return. On my last day here, I will grant you a wish. Just one. Anything a fading spirit can muster. Elis paused, a broom in one hand. He thought about his thirst for travel, his desire to see the hidden corners of the world. But then he looked at Chisei, a literal piece of the world's soul, dying in the dark. A wish, huh? Elis smiled, a mischievous glint in his eyes. I'll think about it. But for now, you're going to sit there and watch me finish these floorboards. I think there's a beautiful grain under all this dirt. Chisei didn't answer, but for the first time, he didn't close his eyes. He watched the mortal move, and for a fleeting second, the pulse in the air felt just a little bit stronger. Chapter 3, The Hum of the Divine. The following days blurred into a soft, hazy sequence of gold and green. The initial shock of meeting a deity had worn off, replaced by a domesticity that felt both surreal and incredibly grounding. Elis didn't go back to the city, he couldn't. Every time he looked at the bus schedule on his phone, he saw Chisei's translucent hands and felt a strange, tugging responsibility in his chest. The adventure had transformed. It wasn't about scaling mountains anymore, it was about the way the light hit the shrine's floorboards at 4 p.m. and the way Chisei's presence felt like a cooling mist on a humid afternoon. Elis had fallen into a ritual. He would wake up in his sleeping bag on the porch, wash his face at the spring, and begin his service. You're humming again, Chisei remarked one morning. The god was sitting upright today, leaning against a pillar. He looked more substantial than the first day, though his skin still possessed a pearlescent quality that made him look like he was made of moonlight. Elis stopped scrubbing the railing, his face flushing. Was I? It's a song my mom used to sing. It helps the work go faster. It is, discordant, Chisei said, though his golden eyes weren't harsh. He tilted his head, a stray lock of cerulean hair falling over his shoulder. But it has a pulse. It sounds like life. Life is pretty discordant, Chisei, Elis laughed, wiping his brow. It's messy and loud and usually out of tune. You've been up here too long. You've forgotten what it sounds like when things aren't perfect. Chisei grew quiet, his gaze drifting to the forest canopy. Perhaps. I remember the silence more. Decades of it. The trees don't speak, they only endure. I had forgotten that humans were so vocal. Elis walked over and sat on the edge of the porch, a few feet away from the god. He noticed the way Chisei's kimono seemed to change color in the light, sometimes a deep indigo, sometimes the bruised purple of a twilight sky. Don't you have any other god friends? Elis asked curiously. A divine group chat or something? Chisei blinked, the modern term clearly flying over his head. We are tied to our land, Elis. When the people leave the land, the god becomes an island. I am the spirit of this spring and this grove. Without the bridge of belief, I cannot cross over to others. I am simply, here. The loneliness in Chisei's voice hit Elis like a physical weight. He's been trapped in his own head for 50 years, Elis realized. No wonder he's so prickly. Well, you're not an island right now, Elis said firmly. He reached out, intending to point at the newly cleaned stone lantern, but his hand brushed against Chisei's. The contact was electric. It wasn't a spark of static, it was a sudden, overwhelming rush of feeling. For a split second, Elis didn't see the shrine. He saw the mountain as it was 300 years ago, vibrant, teeming with life, the air thick with the scent of incense and the sound of children laughing. He felt Chisei's heart, a slow, ancient thrum that beat in time with the earth itself. Elis pulled his hand back, gasping, his heart racing. Chisei was staring at his own hand, his expression one of pure shock. The emptiness in his eyes had been replaced by a startled, raw vulnerability. You. Chisei whispered, his voice trembling. Your spirit is very loud, Elis. Sorry, Elis breathed, his skin still tingling where they had touched. I didn't mean to. No, Chisei interrupted, finally looking up. For the first time, he didn't look like a distant, dying king. He looked like a man who was seeing the world for the first time. It was warm. A heavy, charged silence settled between them. It wasn't the cold silence of the first day, but something thick and expectant. Elis realized then that he wasn't just staying to save a shrine. He was staying because the way Chisei looked at him, with that mix of wonder and fear, made him feel like he had finally found the something different he had been searching for all his life. "I'm going to go get more water," Elis said, his voice a bit higher than usual. As he walked toward the spring, he could feel Chisei's golden eyes tracking him. He realized then that the god wasn't just humming ancient melodies anymore. He was humming the tune Elis had been singing earlier, clumsy and out of sync, but trying. Chapter 4, The Translucent Moon. The heat of the day did not break as the sun dipped below the horizon, instead, it curdled into a thick, electric stillness. By the time the moon began its ascent, a massive, silver-white orb that seemed to press down on the mountain, the forest had gone unnaturally quiet. Even the cicadas had ceased their frantic buzzing, as if the earth itself were holding its breath. Elis sat on the steps of the shrine, his hands gripped tight in his lap. He didn't need to be a god to feel the shift in the air. The thrum he had followed on his first day was no longer a heartbeat, it was a fading echo, vibrating like a string stretched too thin. Elis. The voice didn't come from the air, but seemed to resonate directly inside Elis's mind. He turned, and his heart gave a painful lurch. Chisei was standing near the center of the hall, bathed in the direct glare of the moonlight. He looked ethereal, but in a terrifying way. His blue hair was no longer vivid, it had turned the color of sea foam, nearly white. His body was so translucent that Elis could see the wood grain of the pillars behind him. He looked like a reflection on a soap bubble, ready to pop at the slightest breeze. "It's time," Chisei said. He stepped forward, his movements silent, his feet leaving no sound on the floorboards Elis had spent days scrubbing. Elis stood up, his legs feeling like lead. "No. Not yet. The moon isn't even at its peak. We have more time." Chisei reached out, but he stopped himself before touching Elis. His golden eyes were wide, glowing with a soft, dying light. "The tether is frayed, little mortal. I can feel the mountain forgetting me. I can feel the water of the spring turning back into just water. The divinity is gone." "I haven't forgotten," Elis choked out, his throat tight with a grief he hadn't expected to feel for someone he'd known only a week. "I'm right here. I'm looking at you. And that is why I still have enough strength to speak," Chisei said, a small, sad smile touching his lips. It was the most human expression Elis had seen on him yet. "You have been a dedicated priest to a dead god, Elis. You have given me a week of warmth in exchange for a lifetime of cold. I will not let you leave empty-handed." Chisei extended his hand, palm up. A faint, golden spark danced in the center of it, the very last of his essence. "Your wish," Chisei commanded softly. "Ask for the world. Ask to see every place your eyes crave. Ask for fortune, or for a life that never knows a day of labor. My power is small now, but for a selfless soul, the universe will provide. Speak it, and I will weave it into your fate before I vanish." Elis looked at the spark, then at Chisei. He thought about the maps in his backpack, the restless itch to travel, the desire to be anywhere but home. Then he looked at the way Chisei's form wavered, like a candle flame in a draft. "If I wish for myself," Elis thought, "he dies knowing he was just a tool. A vending machine for a miracle. Another person who came to the shrine just to take." His inner monologue went quiet, replaced by a sudden, crystalline clarity. He stepped into Chisei's space, ignoring the freezing cold that rolled off the god's fading body. "I've made up my mind," Elis said, his voice steadying. "Tell me," Chisei whispered. Elis closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them, staring directly into those molten gold depths. I don't want the world. I've realized something being here with you. Even gods get tired. Even gods get lonely. People come here, they beg for things, they leave, and they forget to even say, thank you, when they get what they want. He took a deep breath. I wish for you, Chisei. I wish that you live a beautiful life. Not as a god who has to carry the weight of a mountain, but as someone special. I wish for you to be someone who is loved, simply for existing. The golden spark in Chisei's hand didn't flare, it shivered. Chisei's eyes went wide. He looked at Elis as if the boy had just spoken a language that hadn't been heard since the dawn of time. You would waste your only miracle on me. It's not a waste, Elis said, his smile radiant and sad. I'm already happy. I got to meet a god who was nice enough to let a clumsy guy like me clean his house. That's enough adventure for one lifetime. Chisei was stunned. A single tear, like a liquid diamond, traced a path down his translucent cheek. You are a fool, Elis, he whispered, his voice breaking. A beautiful, selfless fool. Chisei closed his hand over the spark. He leaned forward, his forehead almost touching Elis's. He muttered a prayer, a low, rhythmic chant in a language that sounded like rushing water and grinding stone. As the prayer ended, the moonlight seemed to explode. Chisei. Elis reached out, his fingers finally passing through where the god's shoulders should have been. The light swallowed everything, the shrine, the trees, the moon itself. When Elis opened his eyes, he was standing alone on the porch. The air was warm again, a normal summer night. The from was gone. The shrine was just a building made of old wood and silence. Elis stood there for a long time, his arms wrapped around himself, wishing into the empty air that Chisei was finally, truly, happy. Chapter 5, A Selfless Prayer. The descent from the mountain felt like a funeral procession for a person only Elis remembered. As he walked back toward the bus stop, the city lights in the distance looked like fallen stars, bright, artificial, and cold. The restless itch that had always driven him was gone, replaced by a hollow, ringing silence in his chest. Returning to his apartment was the hardest part. The air-conditioned air felt dead compared to the mountain breeze, the tap water tasted flat, lacking the sharp, mineral vitality of Chisei's spring. Elis tried to resume his normal life. He went back to his university lectures, sitting in the middle of crowded halls, surrounded by the hum of hundreds of students. But the noise felt lonely. He found himself staring at the back of people's heads, wondering if any of them had ever seen something impossible, if they had ever held the hand of a fading star. Is he out there? Elis wondered constantly. Did the wish work? Is he a baby being born somewhere? Or just a spirit wandering the wind? He became a thankful person, almost to a fault. Every time he bought a coffee, every time a bus arrived on time, he whispered a small, thank you, under his breath. He was doing it for Chisei, trying to provide the gratitude the god had lacked for 50 years. His friends noticed the change. You're quieter, Elis, his best friend, Kaito, said one evening over ramen. You used to be obsessed with going to South America or hiking the Alps. Now you just sit. Are you okay? Elis looked at the steam rising from his bowl. I'm okay. I think I just realized that the best adventures aren't always the ones where you go the furthest. But late at night, when the city fell into its shallow sleep, Elis would sit by his window and hum that same discordant melody his mother had taught him. He would close his eyes and try to conjure the feeling of cold, marble-smooth skin and the smell of ozone. Autumn arrived, painting the city in the same burnt oranges and deep reds of the shrine's peeling torii gate. Elis took a part-time job at a bookstore, stacking heavy hardbacks and organizing shelves. He liked the physical labor, it reminded him of scrubbing the shrine's floorboards. Every blue-haired stranger made his heart skip a beat. Every pair of golden eyes in a crowd, though they were usually just tinted contacts or a trick of the light, sent a jolt of adrenaline through his veins. He went back to the mountain once, in late October. The shrine was still there, but it looked different. Without Chisei, it was just a ruin. The spring had dried up to a muddy puddle, and the air no longer vibrated with that secret, divine pulse. Elis sat on the porch where they had spent those final nights. He left a small offering of dried fruit and a brand new bell he'd bought in the city. "I hope you're happy," he whispered to the empty grove. "I hope someone is loving you right now." He cried on the way down the mountain, short, sharp sobs that he wiped away quickly. He had made a wish for Chisei to be loved, and he had to trust the universe to deliver. He couldn't be selfish. He couldn't want Chisei for himself if it meant the god would have remained a fading shadow. He returned to his apartment, the routine of his life settling over him like dust. He went to school. He went to work. He came home. He was a young man with his whole life ahead of him, yet he felt like a book with its most important chapter missing. Until the afternoon of the first frost. Chapter 5, A Selfless Prayer. The descent from the mountain felt like a funeral procession for a person only Elis remembered. As he walked back toward the bus stop, the city lights in the distance looked like fallen stars, bright, artificial, and cold. The restless itch that had always driven him was gone, replaced by a hollow, ringing silence in his chest. Returning to his apartment was the hardest part. The air-conditioned air felt dead compared to the mountain breeze, the tap water tasted flat, lacking the sharp, mineral vitality of Chisei's spring. Elis tried to resume his normal life. He went back to his university lectures, sitting in the middle of crowded halls, surrounded by the hum of hundreds of students. But the noise felt lonely. He found himself staring at the back of people's heads, wondering if any of them had ever seen something impossible, if they had ever held the hand of a fading star. Is he out there? Elis wondered constantly. Did the wish work? Is he a baby being born somewhere? Or just a spirit wandering the wind? He became a thankful person, almost to a fault. Every time he bought a coffee, every time a bus arrived on time, he whispered a small thank you under his breath. He was doing it for Chisei, trying to provide the gratitude the god had lacked for 50 years. His friends noticed the change. "You're quieter, Elis," his best friend, Kaito, said one evening over ramen. "You used to be obsessed with going to South America or hiking the Alps. Now you just sit. Are you okay?" Elis looked at the steam rising from his bowl. "I'm okay. I think I just realized that the best adventures aren't always the ones where you go the furthest." But late at night, when the city fell into its shallow sleep, Elis would sit by his window and hum that same discordant melody his mother had taught him. He would close his eyes and try to conjure the feeling of cold, marble-smooth skin and the smell of ozone. Autumn arrived, painting the city in the same burnt oranges and deep reds of the shrine's peeling torii gate. Elis took a part-time job at a bookstore, stacking heavy hardbacks and organizing shelves. He liked the physical labor, it reminded him of scrubbing the shrine's floorboards. Every blue-haired stranger made his heart skip a beat. Every pair of golden eyes in a crowd, though they were usually just tinted contacts or a trick of the light, sent a jolt of adrenaline through his veins. He went back to the mountain once, in late October. The shrine was still there, but it looked different. Without Chisei, it was just a ruin. The spring had dried up to a muddy puddle, and the air no longer vibrated with that secret, divine pulse. Elis sat on the porch where they had spent those final nights. He left a small offering of dried fruit and a brand new bell he'd bought in the city. "I hope you're happy," he whispered to the empty grove. "I hope someone is loving you right now." He cried on the way down the mountain, short, sharp sobs that he wiped away quickly. He had made a wish for Chisei to be loved, and he had to trust the universe to deliver. He couldn't be selfish. He couldn't want Chisei for himself if it meant the god would have remained a fading shadow. He returned to his apartment, the routine of his life settling over him like dust. He went to school. He went to work. He came home. He was a young man with his whole life ahead of him, yet he felt like a book with its most important chapter missing. Until the afternoon of the first frost.